Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, Colors of Your Own Sensory Palette with me, Amy Williams with Amy Williams Academy. Before we dive in, I want to make sure that you've got your workbook with you and you know where the pause button is, and you've got some of your favorite art supplies because we're going to do some art today to get to dive in and see what our own sensory sensitivities are, what our own sensory seeking areas are, and more. So if you need to pause, go get that stuff, come on back, and there'll be time to do that later on as well. But let's go ahead and dive in, shall we? So my daughter and I, Millie, are sensory sensitive to several things, and we're sensory seeking to several things. And sometimes we get into sensory overload, often at about the same time. And we've decided to call this phenomenon the sensi-OV. And it's become kind of a code to each of us between each other when things are, when we're feeling sensory overload, that we can, be in Target where it's really loud. There are a lot of people there. And maybe we've had too much coffee and we look at each other and one person says, Sensi Ovi, the other one says, me too. And then we get out, right? So, have you ever been in that place in your classroom or outside of your classroom where things are loud or there's a lot going on or just there's some sort of overwhelm that you're feeling and you can pinpoint it's because of the sound. It's because of all the visual. It's because my body is, everybody's touching me too much. If you've felt that way, then you've probably been in Sensi Ovi. So feel free to add this into your vocabulary going forward. Sensi Ovi. Now, we've all been there and we've all learned some ways to, one, recognize it. And what do we do when we are in Sensi Ovi? Do we get out of the situation? Do we kind of turn in, take some deep breaths? Do we go get some water? Do we take a break? What is it that works for you? Well, my hope today is that we can get, each of us can get more clear about what areas are more activating to our sensory system and what areas we want more input to get activated, right? So we're going to dive into that today, into your sensi ovi or into your sensory seeking, sensory seeking areas as well. So here's what we're going to cover today. So our agenda, we're going to do kind of a brief introduction to what it is we're talking about, the overview of the senses, ones that we know about and ones that maybe we're not so familiar about. We'll talk about sensory sensitivities and sensory avoidances and some sensory seeking areas as well, right? We'll have some time to consider what brings us joy. And often when we are in that place of joy, things we feel content and we feel like on the edge of challenge and satisfaction. We're feeling that sense of joy, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll have some time to do a sensory checklist. It's a super simple, it's in your workbook, a checklist of different areas and different experiences that you might experience that could give some insight about your sensory palette, your own sensory palette, right? And then the art prompts will be throughout, all right? So there'll also be time at the end to set some goals and to decide how do you want to integrate what you've learned and what you've experienced today through our time together today. Know that throughout there'll be time when we will pause, take a deep breath, and carry on. Know that there'll be time to pause the webinar, go to your workbook, put your thoughts on paper, do your reflection. There'll be time to pause and do the art experience without my voice on top of it. So I hope you have space and time where you've silenced as many notifications as possible so that you can certainly turn in and give yourself this gift of self-reflection and introspection, right? So let's carry on, shall we? So I'm Amy Williams with Amy Williams Academy. My goal in the work that I do is to help educators and families learn how to be the best person possible in the lives of the children that you love. So I get to be an educator coach, an educator trainer. I get to work with schools all around the world, school leaders, teachers, education assistants, support staff, everyone. So that's my goal and the purpose of the work that I do. My background is I'm a dance movement therapist and expressive arts therapist. This is not a dance class. This is not a therapy group. However, you may have feelings that come up when you put pen to paper or when you start to write. And that's great. When our emotions are activated, that means things are shifting, right? So I can't help but weave some of that into the work that I do. So as we go forward, know that I've got stories to tell you. I've been where you are. I've been in a place of sensi-obi in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And I've had to learn through trial and error, where are my sensory sensitivities? How can I tend to my own emotions when they start to rise and get really big when I'm in sensi-obi? And where are the places where I seek sensory input, right? Those hugs that are really tight, that something that's heavy that activates my system to pick up. I love to pick up heavy things. So if you need some help moving, give me a call. Not really, but so you probably have some sense of that. And today we're going to dive a little more into your own experience. I'll share some of mine and encourage you to do some self-reflection of your own experience. Okay, so first big question for all y'all is, what do you want? What is your intention? What is your goal for the time that you have set aside to join me in this webinar today? So what are you hoping to get? And what do you expect? And what would it feel like? What would feel good when you finish this, that you felt like, that was time well spent? So let's go ahead and do our first pause and write. So you've got your workbook with you. It's a digital fillable document. If you have it up on your favorite device, you can put your notes right directly on there. Or if you've printed it off and you want to put pen to paper, that's great too. So you have that option. So now's the first time where I'm going to ask you to find your pause button and press pause. And when you are finished, come on back and we'll keep going. I'll be right here. Okay, now we're back. Deep breath. This is our first big pause. All right, let's get into it. So let's talk about sensory messages for a second. When we are existing in the world, we have experiences, and we learn about the world and we understand the world around us through our senses, through many senses, right? So we receive input through our eyes and our ears and our nose and our mouth and our skin and our muscles and our bones and our pressure cells, and through all the parts of our body. We receive those messages and they go to our brain, where we interpret, what is this? Is this something I should run away from? Is this something that everything is safe? So we interpret, what is this thing, right? Based on my experiences, based on what I know about what I'm receiving through my senses. Then we modulate, right? So we decide, okay, what would match the situation in intensity or in speed, in delivery, right? What am I going to do in response to the message that I've interpreted, right? So we kind of modulate that. We integrate it with prior experiences, with the experience. What has happened before? What makes sense now? What is the context of this particular situation? So we integrate, and then at that point, we respond. So we create and decide on how it is that we're going to respond to those sensory messages that we've received, we've interpreted, we've modulated, we've integrated. Now what, right? And get this, in typically developing people, this process happens often just like that, right? And for some of us, there are times and places in any one of these parts where our skills may still be lagging, where we are still learning on interpretation of what the sensory message is, in our own integration of that, or in our response, right? So we have an understanding that children in our classroom and in our community go through this process too, and with more experience and more exposure in the world and just living life day to day, the more experiences that you have, the quicker this process becomes, right? And sometimes we may struggle with one part or another, where it might take us a little bit longer to modulate the sensory message, to integrate that message, and to form a response. So, in any one of these areas, you may see in your classroom children really struggling to interpret: is this dangerous? Is this not dangerous? How does that fit in what my experiences have been? Have I had an experience with this particular sensory input? Right? What is my response? Right? So, in your classroom, you've probably seen children, and you may have said to yourself, this seems like a sensory issue. Or you've had experts who have come in, specialists or other people who are helping assist with a child with some struggles. They've used phrases like sensory issues or sensory integration disorder even, but if you take it down to, regardless of the title or the label, that's fine and all, and sometimes that helps us access services that a child may need or we may need, right? But what it really comes down to for us as educators is, in the moment, in the day-to-day with the child, what can you do to support them to be their happiest, safest, healthy, most full expression of themselves in the environment that you prepare for them, right? So when we have an understanding of what this process might be, and we have an understanding of what our skills are and where our sensitivities exist and where our sensory seeking behaviors exist, we can be better informed of what's happening in front of us with children in our care, right? It's really helpful to know where you are first and foremost, so that you can look to the children around you to decide how you can show up to best support them, right? So with this in mind, let's go back to some of the basics, right? So these are the 5 that we all knew. We learned them in elementary school forever ago, right? So these are the 5 that just about everybody knows, right? So there's auditory, which is hearing. What do we hear, right? Visual, what do we see through our eyes? Gustatory, what do we taste in our mouth? Olfactory, what is the smell that we're smelling, right? And then tactile, touch. So each of these 5 has a place in our body that receives that information and tells our brain about what's happening, right? So our eyes, our ears, our tongue, and our tongue and our nose are pretty connected, right? That's why when you have a cold and you're really stopped up, you can't really taste food the way that you usually taste it, or maybe you want to add more garlic or more spice so that you can really taste it. You know what I'm talking about? So those 2 are kind of closely connected. And then the tactile sense, the sense of touch. What does our skin tell us about the world, right? So if we paused right now, we could turn our attention to one of these 5 senses at a time, right? For typically developing people, we are experiencing all of these at the same time, not just these 5, but all the other ones too. And it can be helpful and it can be regulating to focus on one of these senses at a time, turning our attention to what it is that we see, right? So you've probably heard about this technique for if you're feeling anxious, or maybe you're heading into sensi-obi, and you could take a deep breath and focus on what it is that you see. Name 3 things that you see, 3 things that you hear, 3 things that you feel, 3 things that you could smell, right? So you could isolate these senses and focus on one at a time, and that helps regulate our full system, right? Something I'd like to share with you, then, if you've worked with me before, you may have heard this one before, but it's far, middle, and near, right? So let's try it right now. And we're going to isolate the sense of vision, or what it is that we see. So right now, take your eyes off the screen and look at something that's far away. So if there's a window in front of you, great, or a hallway, or something that you can look at, something that's about 20 feet away, 15 feet away, and focus on that with your eyes. What is it that you see? What color, what shape, what texture do you notice? What movement do you notice with your eyes? right? So focus on that far away thing. Then focus on something that's kind of in the middle distance, about 5 feet or 6 feet away, right? So I was looking at some leaves on a tree outside my window just now, and now I'm going to turn and look at something close by, and I have some flowers on my desk, so I'm going to focus on that. So I'm looking at the petals. What is the shape? What is the shade and light and line and form? All of that. So far, middle, and now close. So hold your hand up in front of you or hold an object that you have close by and bring it close and look at it. Notice it. Your eyes will probably adjust. You might have to move your glasses like me, and you're going to focus on that. Look at it. What's the color? What's the shape? Right? How does it move? Right? Okay. So that's far, middle, and near. And we're isolating one sense at a time. And just now we just isolated our vision, our visual sense. Now you can get creative and help children through this too. When they are entering into Sensio, we can assist in, oh, do you see that squirrel? Do you see that such and such? Oh, do you see that flower? Right? Look at that red on that flower. Okay. Oh, do you notice the lines in my hand? Check it out. Look at that one. It's really curved, right? So you can help lead children through the far, middle, and near experience to help them experience some sense of self-regulation, right? So there's one tool. So you could do vision. You could do sound, like, do you hear the squirrel? Do you hear the clock ticking? Do you hear the sound on my that I'm making with my fingers? Do you smell that? Do you smell do you smell the squirrel outside, or do you smell the rain outside? Can can you smell that flower from here? Can you, oh, I just put on some lotion. Can you smell it? Is that lavender or cinnamon? Right? So you can lead children through that as well. Okay, so there you go. Tool number one. So those are the 5 that we all know. Now let's talk about maybe ones that we may not be as familiar with. Some of you may be very familiar with these. If so, great. And if not, cool. We're just going to do a brief overview of the extras, of the additional ones, right? So what about these? So there's vestibular, which lets us know where is our body in space. Are we somewhere between falling and recovery? Right? There was a choreographer and dancer many decades ago, Doris Humphrey, and she had a quote that every movement falls somewhere along the arc of fall and recovery, or fall and recovery. When you take a step forward, there's a moment in time when you are falling, and then your foot steps forward to catch yourself so that you don't fall on your face, right? So that is informed by our vestibular sense and our proprioceptive sense as well. But our vestibular is more balance, right? And when I stand on one foot, can I hold still and hold balance on one foot? If I close my eyes and hold one foot, I'm taking away my visual sense and really depending on my vestibular sense to keep my balance, right? Okay. Now, the next one is proprioceptive, and that's movement. Where is my body moving in space, right? So if we turned our attention to our proprioceptive sense right now, what is the shape of your legs right now? Can you feel the crease in your hips? Do you feel the bend in your knee? If you pick up something that might be a little heavy, our specialized cells in each of our joints tell us how hard to grasp, when to release, right? Where do our muscle and bones and joints tell us how hard to hold or when to let go, right? So we have specialized cells in each of our joints that inform our brain about that, right? So the interpretation and modulation, right? So that process, it's really fascinating that it's our pressure cells. So they tell us how much do I need to put into how much effort do I need to put into lifting this basket of laundry, or lifting this jug of milk, or lifting this feather, right? That along with our vision interesting how all of our senses come together to tell us what's going on and what are we going to do, right? But when we try to isolate as much as possible one of these sensory messages at a time, it could be, I find it fascinating because my P and V, my proprioceptive and my vestibular, they are really helping me move forward as I'm walking up an escalator, or while I'm running across the playground, or when I'm lifting something that's heavy or something that's light, right? So vestibular is our balance, proprioceptive is our movement, and then there's interoceptive, which is our body cues. Like, let's see, do I need to go to the bathroom? Am I about to sneeze? Is my nose itchy and running, right? Do I feel like, there's something in my ear? So interoceptive tells us about our body cues. What is our body telling us what might be happening internally, right? Then there's thermoceptive, which is, am I hot? Am I cold? Some of us have we feel hot for just a real quick moment, right? Are you with me? So those are just a few, and there are more, right? But today we're going to focus on these, okay? So sometimes we may want to avoid certain sounds, right? I tend to be auditorily sensitive. So if things are really loud, I can get surprised quickly. My response is pretty quick and I don't like it so much. Now, do I enjoy loud music when I'm driving in the car? Yes, because I have control over the volume, right? So there are some times when I avoid that, right? When I'll just tell you a story about me. I am very aware about all the sounds that people around me are making when we're eating dinner and there's chewing that's happening, right? Does anybody else like notice all of those sounds? Is it just me? Maybe, but it's something that I notice that I'm sensitive to sound, right? So I have some areas where I want to avoid. So do you. And so do the children that we work with. And then there are areas where we want to seek that input. I tend to be proprioceptive, seeking proprioceptive input. I feel such satisfaction to engage my body to pick up something heavy, or to push something that's kind of hard to push, or to give someone that I love a hug that's really tight, right? I like to receive them too. So you have to be mindful of that. Am I sensory seeking to the point that this person is giving me clues that this hug is too tight? Yes. So that's what we do and how we learn and what we do with our response. When we know what do we avoid and what do we seek, we can, typically developing people can have greater skill, and we all can learn to manage that, right? If I know that I'm seeking something and it may not be appropriate to the situation, I've got some practice and some years under my belt to modulate that and to shift my response depending on the situation at hand, right? So now you know a lot about me. What about you? So are there places where you find that you are more avoidant to sensory input, visual, auditory, taste, tactile, right? Are you feeling right now the seams that are on the side of your shirt or on the side of your pants? Or do you feel the waistband on the top of your skirt or your pants, right? Or do you feel the necklace that's around your neck? Can you feel it? Or your glasses sitting on your nose? Now, what's interesting is we're receiving all that information all the time, right? And for some people, some of us and some of the children that we work with, it's, imagine if you couldn't turn that off, right? Like the interpretation of, okay, I feel that seam in, or I feel that tag in the back of my shirt, and okay, I feel it, it's okay, carry on. And sometimes it might be, I feel that tag, I feel that tag. I can't listen to you. I can't focus because there's a tag in my shirt. There's a tag in my shirt. There's a tag in my shirt. Or my socks have a feel. The seam isn't going straight across my toes. I can't tend to what it is that you're trying to tell me, teacher, because my socks have a feel, or my tag in my shirt, or there's a flicker of a light that I keep tending to and I can't listen to you. So imagine when we have children in our classroom that we might be thinking, oh, they just don't listen, or they're not minding me, or they're not doing what I want them to do. Could it be that they are experiencing sensory overload and we may not be aware of it? Sometimes it's easier to see because their behaviors will be more outward, right, when they're in sensory overload. And sometimes those behaviors are more internal, and we may not be aware that they're thinking about the tag, the tag, the tag, but they're still looking at us, right? And everywhere in between. And that's like evidence that each of us have a unique sensory palette, right? Like an artist palette with the different colors on it. Some of us have a lot of green for visual. Some of us have just a little bit of yellow for olfactory. Some of us have like a medium amount of blue, and that might be a different sense. So each of us, it's cool how it's like a thumbprint. Each of us has our own unique sensory palette. Once we know what that is, we can be better informed and more responsive in a kind, considerate, respectful way of the children in our care. This also includes the other adults that we work with. So I recommend if you work in a teaching team, or you have an assistant that you work with, or a co-teacher, or someone that you work closely with, I recommend viewing this webinar together and having the conversation of, okay, what's your sensory palette? Here's my sensory palette. How does that inform, and how does that have an impact in the classroom? So feel free. You've got your workbook and you've got those writing prompts. Use those as conversation starters with the teaching team that you work with, or the people that you work most closely with. Okay. Okay, so there's a wonderful TED Talk by Ingrid Fettel-Lee, Where is Joy and How to Find It? I recommend that you pause this right now, the link is in your workbook, you can click it and watch it, and listen to her speak about joy, and speak about how specifically how visual input can affect your sense of calm, your sense of joy, how you experience the world. So this is one way to look at how the visual sense can impact your experience in the world, right? So check it out, go pause, listen, watch, listen, and come on back when you're finished, right? And notice, I'll give you a little spoiler, notice the home that was created for elders. I believe it's in Japan, with all the undulating floors and the dots. Notice what she says about abundance, what she says about sharp lines and round lines, right? Take a look at your classroom, right? This is like bonus extra credit stuff. So after you watch, consider, how does that show up in my classroom? Is there abundance here? Are there round edges here? Are there sharp edges here? So food for thought, consider that as you watch. So go do that, come on back, and when you're ready, I'll be right here and we'll keep on going. Okay, now we're back. Deep breath. Now, this is what I miss being in person with you, or in a live virtual experience with you, because I would love to hear what it is that you think, and how do you see that in your classroom? So feel free to email me and let me know. I'm so curious. Okay, now's the time when we're going to check out the sensory checklist. I wish that I made this up, but I didn't. It's from the book Raising a Sensory Smart Child, Beal and Pesky, from 2005. It's a classic, and I recommend getting that book 100%. I reached out to them to make sure that it was okay to use this sensory checklist in the work that I do with schools and educators, and they said, of course, please do that. So it's time to get that checklist as created by them, and we're gonna do it. We're gonna create some time, give yourself a pause to fill it out. Now, know that it takes a little bit to fill it out. Okay, so make sure that you give yourself time to do that. I give yourself about 10 minutes maybe to do that, maybe a little longer, depending. So find that in your workbook. Let's see. I'm going to see if I could share it here so you could see what I'm talking about. Okay. Whoops, here we go. I'm just going to go through. There it is. So this is what it looks like in your workbook, the sensory checklist. You see? So I recommend you taking some time, to add either to make the checks avoids, seeks, it's mixed, or neutral to each of these questions or prompts under each of the different categories. So there's a category of touch, there's a category of proprioception, body sense, there's a category for vestibular, one for auditory, listening, there's a section for vision, one for taste and smell, right? So take some time, go do that thing, and when you're ready to come back, come on back. Okay, you're probably back now, so I'm gonna do this slideshow, and we're back. All right, so you've done your sensory checklist, you've done all the check marks. Next, I'm curious about, what did you notice? Were there any surprises? Were you like, yep, I knew I was visually sensitive, or, oh, I'm kind of in the middle on that, or I didn't really consider that? What did you notice? Were there any surprises? And then, how do you see it unfold in the classroom? So, for example, if you're I'll go back to me. I'm auditory sensitive. So it might be that in my classroom, I tend to not have a lot of extraneous sound, right? So maybe I won't have music playing, or right, or I might put lots of tapestries on the wall to make the sound less cacophonous, right? And that's informed by my own sensory sensitivity. Is that okay? Yeah. What about all the children in your classroom? What choices are you making for them, right? When you see those sensory sensitivities for the child, we all know how to make it adaptations, right? So we might offer children noise canceling headphones, or we might offer them a place to go that's small and it could get quiet in there, or it limits the visual input if they tend to become sensi OV over lots of visual or lots of movement, right? So we make adaptations in our classrooms, right, for sensory overload. And we also offer a rich sensory diet too. That's another class, but you can do some research about what is a rich sensory diet for the community of children that you serve, so that each child with their own individual sensory palette can get their needs met and learn the skills to manage when sensory overload is happening, or they're seeking sensory input and they're still learning about how to get that input with as little impact on others as possible, right? Okay, so pause and write, and when you're finished with that, come on back. Okay, now we're back. This is the exciting part. So now's time to go get your art supplies. So if you need to go and get your favorite pencils, your favorite gel pens, watercolor is fine too. When I say magic markers, whatever works for you, whatever is your favorite thing. And if you have pencil and paper and that's all you got, that's fine too. Okay, so go away, get your stuff, come on back. We'll be right here. Let's keep on going. So now the fun is going to start. So you're going to need your favorite art materials for this one, right? So now I invite you to take a look at your checklist, right? So you've checked all the checks, you've added you've taken up, you've added, you've got your scores, you could see where your sensitivities exist, where your seeking behaviors tend to exist. And now I invite you to create an image that reflects your top scores for your avoids and for your seeks. What does that look like? What colors would you choose? What types of marks would you make to reflect your avoids and your seeks? Right. So again, this is give yourself a chunk of time for this. Like I recommend at least 10-15 minutes so that you could get into the flow of it, right? And then when you feel like your piece has come to a conclusion, come on back. Now, this is the time when, gosh, I really would love to be in person, because what's fun to do if you're viewing this webinar alongside some colleagues and you're doing it together, share with each other. You know, you could do a gallery walk, hang them up on the wall and go and speak about it as an artist. What would you say about it, right? What tell about your color choices. Where would you place yourself in that drawing or in that painting? Right? Tell me more about, right? So if you have people that you could share that with, go do that thing right now. And if you're on your own doing this, I recommend to pause now and do some writing. So pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, and write this, right? Consider this. What is it that you noticed from your drawing based on the prompt, right? Where, again, any surprises? And then how might this impact the experience in the classroom, right? We know and we're experienced and we're probably really good at creating a space, curating a space for children in our classroom, right? So how does our own sensory palette impact? Do you see if it has an influence or not in your classroom? Do you see yourself reflected? And your teaching team, the other adults with their own individual sensory palette, do you see that reflected as well? Right? Okay. So you've paused, you've done some writing, we've done some drawing, we've done some painting. So take a deep breath and we'll carry on. Okay. So now the fun continues. Oh, let me tell you this. Now, you'll notice that the recording of this webinar is pretty short. So get this, you get credit for this webinar for the whole time because of the time you spend during the pause and reflect. So I just want to let you know how important that is, to really give yourself the time to do the self-reflection and to do the pause and to give yourself time to dive into these arts experiences. Right. So when you go through the arts experience, that is the tool of integrating the content that we're talking about, integrating what you learned about yourself through your own self-reflection. So I'm here to recommend that you totally give yourself time to do that. Right. Don't skip it. Okay. Okay. So now we're back. Now the fun continues. Here's the next one. So you'll need some music for this one. So either get your phone, open up Spotify, to get your records out, however you want to bring music into your space, do that thing. But you're going to need music for this one. Okay. So choose some music. Excuse me. Choose some music, either a random, push shuffle and note it, interesting. What song's going to come up? Is it Duke Ellington? Is it Taylor Swift? Who is it? Okay, so that's kind of an interesting thing. No, then I invite you to close your eyes or cast your eyes downward to kind of limit the visual input that's coming in. And we're going to focus on our auditory input. Okay, so close your eyes or cast your eyes downward and draw based on and inspired by the rhythm and the dynamics of what it is that you hear, right? And it could be that it's what it looks like is a bunch of scribble scrabble, or it looks like a bunch of dots or something scattered, or it's a rainbow or something more representational. It depends. This is absolutely your art experience. There's no wrong way to do it. There's no right way for it to look when you're finished. Full permission to not put it in a frame. the experience of creating the marks, creating the piece is the important piece. The final piece is not that important. It may be helpful to take a look at it every now and then, but you get to decide what you do with the pieces that you create during this webinar. Okay. Okay, so you've got your eyes cast downward, you're making marks, you're drawing inspired by the rhythms and dynamics of the music. And then after a few minutes, change the music, right? So you don't have to stick, to one song to its completion, right? You could do it for a minute or two and then change it to something completely different and repeat, right? If you're having a lot of fun with this, repeat this over and over again. Take your time to listen to lots of different kinds of music. Okay. So get your music, get your art materials, do the thing. And when you're finished, come on back. All right. So now you're back. You know what it is. It's time to pause and write. What did you notice? Any surprises? And then take that inner reflection and turn it to your classroom. How might music or sound impact the experience in the classroom? How might your musical or sound choices as you're creating that space for children impact the experience in the classroom? Now, we can, as guides and leaders in the classroom, we have more control of turning the music on or off. We also can put something on the wall to dampen the sounds. And sometimes we may be in a classroom space where we don't have a lot of influence and ability to change that, right? So you might be in a really open room where the sound bounces off of every space, or you might be in a really tiny room where it can get really loud really fast. So consider that as well. How does music, how does sound experience uh, influence the experience for the children and yourself in the classroom space? So pause and write and come on back when you're done. Now we're back. Take a pause. If you haven't had water, go get some. Okay. Okay, we're going to do something else. So the fun continues. So for this next bit, you're going to need paper and marker, pencil, or pen, right? So here's the thing. I invite you to draw a simple outline of a human figure which would represent yourself. So it could be a stick figure, it could be a squiggly line figure. It's your own representation of yourself. Okay. You don't have to share if you don't want to. Now, you've drawn the outline of yourself. Map out on this outline the areas of your body that correspond to the different sensory preferences or sensitivities. So remember, we're going to go back to the places where we seek and the places where we may avoid, right? So so you've got your outline and you've got your marker pen or pencils, and take a moment to do like a body check-in, right? And make those marks on your paper to represent, this is where I feel it when I have that sensory seeking, that desire to have more sensory input. This is where I feel it when I'm feeling more sensitive, right? So you might feel radiating heat from your face, or you might feel like your ears are pulsing, or you might feel a twisting in your gut, or you might feel tension in your shoulders, or you might feel your toes gripping onto the ground, right? Each of us have our own experience and our own way that our body communicates to us where we are. Are we sensi-ovi? Are we sensi-okay, right? So take some time to do that. And when you're done, come on back. And here we go. We're going to pause and write again. So the question is, what did you notice? Was any surprises? And have you ever noticed that your sensitivities or your avoiding behaviors play out in your classroom, right? I have some earplugs that I recommend. They're loop earplugs. So they're not paying me for this recommendation, but I recommend them. They're small and they're cute because they come in all sorts of different colors. And you can get them where they just dampen the sound or you can get them where they almost cancel the sound, right? I wouldn't recommend canceling the sound when you're in a classroom, but you can wear them to dampen the sound, especially if you are auditorily sensitive. So they're super tiny. I wouldn't recommend them for preschoolers, but that's one way that our sensitivities can play out in the classroom and the ways that we make adaptations for ourselves. Okay, so as you pause and you write about your last art experience, have you ever noticed that your sensitivities or avoidant behaviors come out in the classroom? Write about a time when you were in sensory overload and your response was not what you wanted it to be. You wish you could have a do-over. I think we've all had that experience. So take some time, write that down, and then just give yourself some grace and forgiveness and say, okay, I did that thing. What can I do differently next time? I'm going to wear those earplugs. I'm going to make the transition happen earlier. I'm going to, and then what's your plan? What are you going to do differently? Or what are you going to do the same? If you're thinking of a time when your own sensory sensitivities and seeking behavior showed up and you managed it and all was well. We have those stories too. All right, so go ahead and pause and write. And when you're finished, come on back. Okay, deep breath. We're going to take our shoulders back and down. We're going to wriggle our face, pull our ears back, move your hands a little bit because you've been writing and drawing and painting quite a bit by now. Okay. You thought we were done? Nope, there's more. Okay, the fun continues. So now this next one, you're going to still need some paper, marker, pencil, pen, something like that. All right. And here's the prompt. Here's the invitation. So for this one, draw a simple map of your classroom, right? So a simple line drawing of here's kind of the boundary of my classroom, here where the windows are, the doors, and here is about where shelves are and tables and chairs, and here's kind of where I sit, and that kind of thing. So make a simple map of your classroom. That's first, right? Next, highlight with color or with some sort of arrow or star, however you want to highlight those areas in your classroom that correspond to the different sensory preferences or sensitivities that you have, right? So the reason I invite you to do this piece it is really in response to my own experience in a classroom when I paused and I noticed, I tend to place myself on this side of the classroom. And I'll go over there, but I tend not to go over there because that's where the block action was happening. That's where the bells were happening. And it was pretty loud on that side of the classroom. So when I did some self-reflection, I noticed, I don't go over there very much. Do I need to go over there so I'm aware? Yes. But once you notice, I'm doing that thing, then you can do something different. Okay. So that's the point of this particular prompt is when you see your map of your classroom, highlight those areas where you notice where your sensory sensitivities are going to be activated or where there are areas that you were drawn to, right? And this is just a straight up map. For real, bonus if you want to take a look at relationships, right? This might be hard to hear, but what is true is that we are drawn to others that satisfy and feel good with our sensory experience, right? So it might be that you are drawn to children who are really physical, or they run, or they love to give hugs that are really hard or to crash into things. You might find that, okay, same, we're similar. Okay. And you spend more time with that child or not. So that's like some deep self-reflection to notice, okay, where is my sensory palette? How is that impacting and influencing not only my classroom design and how I curate my classroom and prepare my classroom for students, but how does it inform the relationships that I have with children. Interesting. So check it out. And again, that's some deep work, and it may bring up some feelings. Full permission to give yourself forgiveness and make a decision to do something different or to continue doing what's working well. All right. So do the thing. And when you're finished, come on back. All right. Now, after every art experience, there's time to pause and write. So here's this one. What did you notice? Were there any surprises? What changes might you make in your classroom? And if you did that kind of bonus reflection of relationships, what changes might you make in your approach to particular children? Are there children that came to mind that you'd like to, I want to connect more with them? And I have to make an effort to do that. You can do that. And we're human. We're human. Okay. So when you start connecting with those children, and if you know about connection at neutral times, you've heard me talk about that, how important it is to make a connection that's brief, often nonverbal, with children during neutral times, not when they're doing something that please us or do something that's really annoying, but those in between times when they don't have to do anything to get our connection or our regard or our noticing, right? That's a powerful spot, that connection at neutral times. And that's one place where you can begin when you notice, these, I tend to avoid that, or I tend to be on top of that behavior more than maybe is necessary. Connect at neutral times with those children and notice what shift begins to happen. Okay. And again, that's like the bonus, deeply reflective stuff. Okay. So give yourself a break. If you find that in your self-reflection, you're doing something that you'd like to do different. Okay. Okay. So pause and write. And when you're finished, come on back. All right. You're back. Deep breath. Let's carry on. Okay. So remember that TED Talk with Ingrid Fettel-Lee? And if you weren't able to finish it for whatever reason, now is the time to go back and either re-listen to it again or finish it for real. Because this next question is kind of based on that. Think about where you find joy and how do you make adaptations for yourself already, right? What do you do in your classroom for your own sensory palette as it relates to bringing more joy to the work that you do, more joy in your day-to-day that gets you out of bed and gets you excited about coming to school, right? It may be that, when you reflect, you notice I don't really make adaptations for myself to bring more joy. Maybe that's why I really don't want to get up and go to work in the morning. One point to consider, right? So check it out. What do you do to make adaptations for yourself? If you notice that you don't do a lot, what can you do? What are the possibilities, right? Yes, 100%. The space that we create, the environment we create is the children's space, right? And we are a part of that golden triangle where the child is at a point, the environment is another point, and then the adults, including us, are the other point. And together, those three elements create the classroom experience. It's one way to look at it, right? So when we create that space for children, we prepare that environment for individual children. Remember that you are a part of it as well, right? Okay. So the next question to consider is, how do your sensory needs and the sensory needs of children intersect? So this might go back to the relationships that you have. What children are you drawn to? What colleagues are you drawn to? Right? Why might that be? Do you have a similar sensory palette in a particular area? Place to start asking questions. And then the next piece is, how can you remain authentic and yet prepare the environment as the children's space, right? So again, we're a third piece of the triangle. How can we remain authentic to ourselves and prepare the space, which is the children's space. Okay. So those are questions that I encourage you to pause and write about. I will leave this up on the screen. So if you want to pause it, you have them right here. They're also in your workbook. And when you've finished writing about that, press play and we'll carry on. Okay. Now, if you can believe it, we're nearing the end of this webinar. You have invested probably a considerable amount of time creating art, answering lots of questions, and giving yourself time to do some self-reflection. Now's the time to decide what's your action, what's your next step, right? What's the one thing that you plan to do in the coming weeks, right? And what's your big takeaway? What was a big aha moment today that maybe you weren't expecting? Right. So give yourself some time to write that down. And your plan, here's what I'd like to say about plans, right? So maybe there were lots of aha moments for you today, or lots of places where you think, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that differently. I want to do that better, right? Full permission to choose one at a time. And with that one shift and one change, you change your trajectory for the long term. All right. So you don't have to make all the changes all in one day. That's a lot. Talk about sensi-obi. So choose one thing. What is one thing you plan to do? And then who are you going to tell about it? Right? Who's a colleague or a friend or somebody on your Square Squad that you're going to let know, hey, I took this webinar, I did this, I had this insight, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do. Please check in with me in about a week to see how it's going. And then your friend or your colleague will say, okay, and they'll do that thing for you, right? Helps hold us accountable. Or put a reminder in your phone. People are really great for it though. All right. Lastly, before we close up, I want to let you know and remind you that I do have some books that are available. I've written some social stories for children, and they're available. You can reach out to me and get an author copy directly from me, or you can find them on Amazon. If you go to my website, click on the button that says books, it'll take you straight to there, and you can get them there. So I have a social story about managing big emotions, which is called Wow, that's a big emotion. Has some prompts and opportunities to practice with children what to do when you're feeling frustrated or devastated or happy or excited, right? Another one is Hey Friend, Want to Play? And it actually has a different cover than this one. So it's a brand new cover. Hey Friend, Want to Play? That's about how to ask friends to play. It's kind of feeds into the next book, which is Consent. What is that anyway? That one also has a new cover. And that's about consent. When someone says yes, when someone says no, when they change their mind, what does a yes sound like? What does a no sound like? Right? So have that one. And then the last one for children is Rude, Mean, and Bully. What is that? And the star of that one is the upstander and the power of the upstander. Upstanders unite. What can you do? How can you help children be the upstander for each other when they see that their friend is having a hard time saying no or saying yes or going to get help? An upstander can come in to help, right? Sometimes that help is going to get the teacher, right? So check it out. Those are the books that I have available for you. Happy to have these in classrooms all around the world. Thank you so much for joining me today. Here are the places where you can find and follow me: Instagram, Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn as well. amywilliamsacademy@gmail.com is my email address. So if you have any questions based on anything we talked about during this webinar, know that part of the benefit that you get from webinars with Amy Williams Academy is access to me. So if you have a question, hey, I took this webinar, you talked about this, I have a question, and I'll do my very best to answer you as soon as I can. All right. So that's that. My website, amywilliamsacademy.com. And this QR code is something that you can click and download all my contact info into your phone. Then you have everything. All right. So until next time, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope now you have many pieces to put on your wall. Thanks for joining. And until next time, take it easy. See you soon.